The desperate call. The galaxy was on the edge of collapse. Star systems were falling, entire civilizations were vanishing, and no one knew why. The source of the destruction was unknown, a mystery wrapped in shadows. Entire fleets had been wiped out in mere moments, with no sign of the enemy's strength or origin. The most powerful fleets of the galaxy had been scattered, and what remained were the survivors clinging to the edges of space. But none of them could escape the inevitable. Humanity, once proud and strong, was now a shadow of its former self. The war had taken everything: their resources, their fleets, their planets, and now even their will to fight was faltering. The people of Earth had built strong defenses, but these were nothing compared to the force that now threatened to wipe them from the stars. In a hidden command center, General Eleanor Grant stared at the large display in front of her. The image of a burning planet flashed on the screen. It was another victim, another world consumed by the unknown enemy. The silence in the room was deafening. No one knew what to say anymore. The enemy had torn through their defenses, and humanity's last line of defense was crumbling. "General, the situation is critical," Captain Lee said, her voice tense with worry. "We've lost contact with most of the fleet. Our defense stations are failing. We can't hold out much longer." Grant's face remained impassive, but deep down, she felt the weight of the moment. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was on the brink of extinction. The once proud human race was now fighting for survival, and it seemed like there was no hope left. "What are our options?" Grant asked, though she already knew the answer. "There's only one left, but I'm not sure if it's worth the risk," Captain Lee replied, her voice low. "We've heard the stories, whispers from those who were brave enough to venture far beyond the known galaxies." Grant raised an eyebrow. "You mean the ancients?" Lee nodded. "Yes, the ones who vanished long ago. The ones who were said to have wielded power beyond imagination. No one knows if they're real, but if they are, if we can find them." Grant turned to face her, the spark of hope flickering in her eyes. "If we can find them, they could save us." The thought was insane. No one had seen or heard from the ancients for millennia. They were a myth, a legend told by those who had long since forgotten the truth. They were supposed to be the ones who left the galaxy, abandoning everyone else to fend for themselves. But now, with humanity's future hanging by a thread, even myths were worth chasing. "We don't have a choice," General Grant said, her voice firm with resolve. "We need to contact the ancients. They are our last hope." The crew around her exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone knew that this was a gamble, a long shot. But in the face of annihilation, what else could they do? "Prepare the fleet," Grant ordered. "We'll go to the coordinates." Captain Lee hesitated for a moment. "General, the location is far, beyond the outer rim of known space. It's a place no one has ventured to in centuries. It's dangerous, and we might not even make it back." "I know," Grant replied, "but we don't have the luxury of time. We must try." The fleet was ready. It wasn't large, not anymore. The fleet was a mixture of old ships and the few remaining warships that still functioned after the constant barrage of attacks. But it was all they had left. The humans had been pushed to their limits, but their defiance and will to survive still burned within them. As the ships powered up, the crew worked in silence. There was no music, no jokes, no small talk. The tension was thick, and everyone knew what was at stake. This was no ordinary mission. They weren't just going to explore a forgotten corner of the galaxy. They were gambling the future of humanity on the hope that a myth would be true. General Grant stood at the command center, her hands gripping the console in front of her. She was a leader, but even she couldn't shake the nerves coursing through her. Her mind raced with questions. What if they were wrong? What if the ancients didn't exist? What if they never found them? And by the time they returned, Earth would already be gone. "General, the fleet is ready," Captain Lee said, breaking her thoughts. "We're clear to launch." Grant nodded, taking a deep breath. "All right, let's move out." set a course for the coordinates. The ships slowly moved away from the command center, heading toward the unknown. The vastness of space stretched before them, filled with countless stars and unseen dangers. It was a journey into the abyss, but it was the only chance they had left. As the fleet traveled deeper into uncharted space, General Grant couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The vast emptiness outside the ship was a constant reminder of how little humanity knew about the universe. There were so many stars, so many planets, so many civilizations that had risen and fallen. And now, humanity was facing the same fate. But Grant wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Not while there was even the slightest chance that the ancients might still be out there. They said the ancients left because they didn't want to interfere with the galaxy's natural order, Captain Lee said, her voice thoughtful. But what if they've been watching this whole time? What if they've seen what's happening and decided it's time to step in? It's possible, Grant replied. But even if they do come, we can't expect them to save us. We'll need to prove ourselves, show them that humanity is worth saving. Lee nodded, but it was clear that she too was struggling with doubts. Humanity had always been seen as insignificant by the larger galactic civilizations. They were the newcomers, the ones who had only recently discovered space travel, and their history had been full of wars and mistakes. Why would the ancients help them now? We can't wait for an answer, Grant said, cutting through the silence. We've got to give it our all, and we have to be ready for anything. If they don't help us, then we'll have to fight this battle ourselves. But even as she said the words, Grant couldn't shake the feeling that they were all running out of time. The enemy was coming, and if they didn't find the ancients, humanity might be lost forever. The stars outside the ship seemed to blur as the fleet sped toward the unknown. Time was running out, and in the dark void of space, the only thing they could rely on was hope. Hope, and the possibility that the greatest force the galaxy had ever known might still be watching. The stars stretched endlessly before them as the fleet ventured deeper into uncharted space. The silence on board was heavier than ever. Each crew member, lost in their thoughts, couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the right path? Were they chasing a myth, or was the galaxy's last hope finally within their reach? General Eleanor Grant stood before the large holographic map displayed in the command center, watching as their fleet slowly moved toward the coordinates. The map flickered in front of her, a faint red dot showing their current position. It was only a small speck, barely noticeable against the vast expanse of the galaxy. Captain Lee, Grant said, her voice breaking the silence. How long until we reach the coordinates? Lee, standing by the communication console, checked the readings. At our current speed, we should arrive in approximately 12 hours. The area is still uncharted, so we can't guarantee what we'll find. Grant nodded, her expression hardening. We have no choice. We'll keep pushing forward. As she turned away from the map, a cold shiver ran down her spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. Maybe it was the endless void of space, or maybe it was the growing uncertainty of what they were doing. But the thought haunted her. She had always been a woman of logic, of action. But now, every decision felt like they were playing dice with the fate of humanity. Meanwhile, in the lower levels of the ship, the rest of the crew went about their tasks. There was little time for rest, but even the most seasoned soldiers couldn't ignore the tension building up. In the mess hall, a few of the soldiers gathered in quiet conversation, their voices low and filled with uncertainty. You think they're really out there? One soldier asked, his voice shaky. The ancients, the ones who left us all behind. I don't know, another soldier replied, staring down at his food. But we don't have much of a choice, do we? Earth's done for if we don't find them. They're just a myth, the third soldier said dismissively. We've been chasing stories for centuries. There's nothing out there. But what if they're real? The first soldier's voice held a mix of hope and fear. What if they're watching us, waiting for us to prove we're worth saving? There was a long pause. No one seemed to have an answer, and the conversation died as quickly as it had started. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Could the ancients truly be out there? Or were they simply searching for something they could never find? On the bridge, the crew's anxiety was palpable. General Grant walked up to the command center, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the crew's focused faces. She had been part of many missions in her time, but none of them had felt like this. This wasn't just a fight for territory or resources. This was a fight for survival. "We're getting closer," Grant muttered, her eyes glancing over the holographic map. The red dot marking their course was now surrounded by hundreds of empty star systems, devoid of life, as though they were traveling through a forgotten part of the galaxy. "General," Captain Lee called out from the communication console, "I've picked up an unusual signal. It's weak, but it's definitely coming from ahead. It's in a frequency we haven't seen before." Grant's heart skipped a beat. A signal. That could mean they were not alone. "What kind of signal?" she asked, moving closer to the console. "It's hard to say, General. It's encrypted, but the frequency is strange. We've never seen anything like it in our records." Grant's mind raced. Could it be the ancients? Could this signal be a trace of their long-lost technology, or even a warning? Either way, it was something they had to investigate. "Track the signal," Grant ordered. "Increase speed. We need to get there as fast as possible." As the ship began to accelerate, the tension grew. No one spoke, but the air was thick with anticipation. They were drawing closer to the unknown, to something that could either save or destroy them. Hours passed, and the crew could feel the strain of the long journey. Sleep came in short bursts, and even the most seasoned soldiers were beginning to show signs of fatigue. Yet, despite the exhaustion, no one complained. They were all too focused on the mission. They had come so far, and they couldn't afford to fail now. Suddenly, the ship's alarms blared, breaking the silence with their shrill warning. Everyone rushed to their stations, panic creeping into their voices. Captain Lee's voice cut through the chaos. "General, we're entering a nebula. It's dense, and there's something strange about it. We can't see anything ahead of us." Grant's face hardened. "What do you mean by strange?" "There's something blocking our sensors. It's as though the nebula is distorting our equipment. We can't get an accurate reading." The crew worked quickly to compensate for the interference, but it was clear that the situation was deteriorating. Grant's eyes scanned the view screen, where only the swirling colors of the nebula filled their vision. The signal they had been tracking was still there, faint and distant, but it was moving. "We're close," Grant muttered under her breath, her gaze locked on the distant signal. "We're so close." The ship pressed forward, cutting through the fog of the nebula. Every crew member knew that the next few minutes would determine everything. If they didn't find the source of the signal, if they couldn't uncover what lay beyond the nebula, their mission would fail, and humanity's last hope would be lost. And then, as the ship neared the edge of the nebula, something changed. The signal grew stronger, clearer. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a beacon, a call to something far greater than themselves. "Prepare for whatever comes next," General Grant said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "We are about to find out if the ancients are real. And if they are, we must be ready for anything." The ship's engines hummed softly, their deep vibrations resonating through the hull as it cut through the last layers of the nebula. The crew had been on edge for hours, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. The signal, once weak and distant, had now intensified, filling the communication system with a steady pulse. It was clear. They were close. General Grant stood before the view screen, her eyes fixed on the swirling colors of the nebula that obscured their vision. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but she pushed it aside. The galaxy had been silent for so long, and now they were on the verge of discovering something that could change everything. The ancients were real, and they were waiting for them. "General," Captain Lee's voice broke through her thoughts, "we're picking up strange readings. It looks like an artificial structure, massive in scale. It's just ahead." Grant's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment they had been searching for. The ancients had left something behind. And now, after centuries of searching, they were on the verge of finding it. But why had the galaxy's most powerful civilizations never ventured this far? Why had the space beyond human territory been left unexplored? Set a course toward the structure, Grant ordered, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Prepare for immediate landing. We don't know what we're walking into, but we need answers. As the crew worked feverishly to adjust the ship's course, the tension in the air grew heavier. Every heartbeat seemed to echo louder than the last. They were about to enter a new chapter in humanity's history, but the unknown was as daunting as it was alluring. The ship neared the coordinates, and a sense of unease settled over the crew. It wasn't just the unknown that frightened them. It was the weight of what this discovery meant. If the ancients had truly left something behind, something powerful enough to awaken the galaxy, what kind of force would they be facing? Approaching the structure now, Captain Lee announced, his voice tight with concentration. General, the structure is massive, at least the size of a small planet. It's emitting a strange energy field. We're having trouble getting accurate readings on it. Grant's mind raced as she tried to process what she was hearing. A structure that size could hold unimaginable secrets or unimaginable dangers. The fact that it was hidden within the nebula only added to the mystery. What was it protecting? What had it been left here for? Is it a weapon? One of the officers on the bridge asked, his voice quivering. Could the ancients have built something like that? We don't know yet, Grant replied, her tone firm. But we'll find out soon enough. Continue preparations for landing. As they drew closer, the energy field around the structure pulsed, its rhythm eerily synchronized with the ship's movements. The field seemed alive, almost conscious, as if it were aware of their approach. The ship's systems flickered, then stabilized, but the crew could feel the strange sensation in the pit of their stomachs. Something was watching them, waiting for them. With a soft jolt, the ship's engines powered down, and the crew felt the familiar weightlessness of landing. The moment had arrived. Landing complete, Captain Lee reported. We're on the surface. Grant stood still for a moment, taking in the magnitude of what lay before them. The structure was far larger than anything they had ever seen. It wasn't just a building. It was a colossal, jagged spire that stretched toward the stars. Its surface was smooth and metallic, but it seemed to pulse with an otherworldly glow. The energy field surrounding it buzzed faintly, like the hum of an ancient machine. Prepare the landing party, Grant said, her voice low but resolute. We need to investigate this structure. Everyone, stay sharp. We have no idea what we're walking into. The crew quickly assembled, their weapons ready but their faces betraying the uncertainty that gnawed at them. They had trained for countless scenarios, but nothing had prepared them for this. A structure of this size, hidden away for so long, and the signal they had followed, it all led here. And now, standing on the threshold of the unknown, they were about to take the first steps into a place no human had ever been. The hatch of the ship opened with a hiss, and a cold wind swept in, carrying with it the smell of something ancient, something forgotten. The ground beneath their boots was rocky, uneven but solid. There was no sign of life, no creatures, no signs of civilization, but the structure loomed ahead, dominating the landscape. Stay together, General Grant ordered, her voice cutting through the tension. This could be a trap, or it could be a treasure trove of knowledge. Either way, we'll be ready. They advanced, each step heavier than the last. As they neared the base of the spire, the ground beneath them seemed to vibrate, faintly at first, then more intensely. The air felt charged, as though the structure itself was alive. And in that moment, they all felt it, a deep, resonating pulse that seemed to echo from within the very heart of the spire. General, Captain Lee said, his voice trained. The signal, it's coming from inside. Grant nodded, her heart racing. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. Whatever lay ahead, Whatever answers they sought, they were about to face it. They had come for the truth, but now the truth was coming for them. "Stay alert," she said. "Let's go. We'll make history today." As they entered the base of the structure, the air grew colder, and the light from their helmets barely illuminated the vast space around them. The walls were made of smooth metal, covered in strange symbols, some that appeared familiar, but most that were beyond comprehension. The floor was uneven, as though time had warped the very foundations of this place. These symbols, they look like some sort of language, one of the soldiers murmured, his voice awestruck. Could this be the writing of the ancients? "It's possible," Grant replied, her gaze scanning the symbols. "But we don't have time to decode it now. We need to find the source of that signal." The pulse from the structure grew stronger, and the crew began to feel an unsettling pressure in the air, as though the very space around them was shifting. It was then that they realized they were not alone. Something had stirred within the spire, something ancient, something powerful, and it was awake. The deeper they ventured into the spire, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to close in around them, the pulse of energy growing stronger, vibrating through their bones. The air was thick with an ancient presence, as if the very structure was alive, breathing in the cold silence that surrounded them. The crew's footsteps echoed in the vast, hollow chambers, their own breath loud in their ears. General Grant led the way, her hand on the hilt of her sidearm, her eyes scanning every shadow. She could feel it, the presence that stirred within the heart of this place. It was like a faint whisper against her mind, distant yet pressing. It wasn't just a machine, she realized. This was something more. "Keep moving," Grant ordered, her voice sharp. "Stay focused." The soldiers behind her exchanged nervous glances, but they didn't falter. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. Whatever lay ahead was beyond anything they had ever encountered, but they had to face it. The signal was close. The truth was close. Suddenly, the corridor opened into a massive chamber. The sheer scale of the room took their breath away. It was like nothing they had ever seen. A cavernous space filled with towering stone pillars that stretched toward a high, unreachable ceiling. The air crackled with energy, and in the center of the room stood a massive object, an ancient, triangular device covered in strange markings. It seemed to pulse with the same rhythm they had been following, like the heartbeat of the spire itself. "That's it," Captain Lee whispered, his voice full of awe. "That's the source of the signal." Grant's gaze locked onto the device. It was more than just a machine. It was an artifact, something of immense power. She could feel it, almost like a weight pressing down on her chest. They had found the key to understanding the ancients, to unlocking the mysteries of the galaxy. But now that they had found it, the question remained, why had the ancients hidden this away? Why had they left the vast reaches of human space untouched? The device flickered, its energy field intensifying. The symbols on its surface seemed to shift, rearranging themselves into something familiar. But the meaning was still just out of reach. It was like a puzzle that had been designed to keep out those who were not worthy of its secrets. Suddenly, the entire room shuddered, the ground beneath their feet vibrating violently. A deep rumbling noise filled the chamber, coming from deep within the heart of the spire. The crew froze, their eyes wide with terror. "What's happening?" one of the soldiers asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Grant replied, her voice tight with fear. "Stay alert." The energy around them grew more intense, the hum in the air vibrating through their bones. The device at the center of the room began to glow brighter, its surface flickering with strange symbols. Then, as if on cue, a loud crack echoed through the chamber, and the floor beneath them split open. The crew stumbled backward, but Grant caught herself on the edge of one of the stone pillars. The air grew colder, and the light from the device flickered, casting eerie shadows across the room. Then, with a deafening roar, the floor gave way completely, and the ground beneath them collapsed. The soldiers scrambled to hold onto anything they could, but the chamber seemed to swallow them whole. The floor split open like a wound, and they fell, plummeting into the darkness below. General Grant's head spun as she tumbled through the air, the rush of wind in her ears making it difficult to hear anything else. She reached out, grabbing the edge of a piece of shattered stone, her fingers desperately clinging to it. She managed to stop her fall, her heart pounding in her chest as the world around her spun wildly. The darkness that surrounded her was oppressive, almost suffocating. She could hear the others, scattered in the abyss, calling out to each other in the darkness. The distant hum of the device still filled the air, a constant reminder of the power that lay just beyond their reach. "Captain Lee," Grant shouted, her voice hoarse. "Are you there?" A voice answered from the darkness. "General, we're all here, but where are we?" Grant peered into the black void, her eyes straining to make out anything in the dark. The fall had broken the chamber into what looked like a massive underground cavern, the walls lined with strange symbols and inscriptions that glowed faintly in the darkness. "I don't know," Grant replied, "but we need to regroup, stay together, and move cautiously. We don't know what's down here." The crew slowly gathered themselves, checking for injuries and ensuring their equipment was intact. They had fallen far, farther than they could have ever anticipated. As they regrouped, the strange symbols on the walls seemed to shift, almost as though they were alive, reacting to their presence. Grant's mind raced as she took in the scene. They had descended into the very heart of the structure, and now they were trapped in the depths of the ancients' hidden world. But it wasn't just the fall that disturbed her. It was the eerie sense of being watched. The air was thick with a palpable presence, and the crew could feel it too. "Move out," Grant ordered. "We have no idea what we're dealing with, but we need to find a way out of here. We need to find answers." As they moved through the cavern, the strange glow of the symbols cast an eerie light on their path. Every step they took seemed to draw them deeper into the unknown, and with each passing second, the tension mounted. The device above, the signal, it was all leading them here. But what waited for them in the heart of this place? The cavern seemed to stretch on forever, and the air grew colder with each step. A sense of dread began to settle over the crew. They had come for knowledge, for answers, but the deeper they went, the more it felt like they were being drawn into a trap. Then, ahead, a faint light flickered in the distance, and with it came the unmistakable sound of movement. The crew froze. Something was approaching. Grant signaled for them to stop and take cover, her heart racing. Whatever was coming, it was close, and they weren't ready for it. The light in the cavern flickered again, brighter this time. It wasn't a natural light. It was sharp and unnatural, like a beacon cutting through the oppressive darkness. The sound that accompanied it was low at first, like a distant rumble, but it steadily grew louder, until it became a deep thrumming hum. The kind of hum that you felt in your bones, reverberating through the ground and filling the air. It was the pulse of something ancient, something powerful. "Stay quiet," General Grant whispered, her voice barely a breath against the eerie silence of the cavern. The crew crouched low, their backs pressed against the jagged walls, their weapons ready, but their nerves stretched tight as they waited for whatever was coming to reveal itself. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and then, out of the shadows, a figure appeared. It was tall, humanoid, but its movements were unnatural, almost inhuman, as if it wasn't quite bound by the same laws that governed the rest of the universe. Its body was draped in dark, flowing robes that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light, and its face was hidden beneath a hood of darkness, save for two glowing eyes that burned with an intense, unnatural energy. The crew tensed, but they didn't move. There was a collective feeling among them, an unspoken understanding that they were facing something beyond their comprehension. The figure moved with slow, deliberate steps, its eyes scanning the surroundings. It seemed to glide over the ground, never quite touching it, as if gravity itself had little effect on it. For a long moment, it didn't notice the crew. It was as if it was searching for something, its movements erratic, like a predator sniffing the air, hunting for its prey. The crew held their breath, unsure if they should reveal themselves or remain hidden. Frozen in place, General Grant's mind raced. Whatever this being was, it wasn't of their world, and it wasn't something they could fight. But the signal had led them here, to this very moment, and now they were caught in a crossfire of forces much older and more powerful than they had ever imagined. The figure finally stopped in the middle of the cavern, its head tilting slightly, as if sensing their presence. For a moment, there was a tense silence, a pause in which the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. The crew felt it, a sudden shift, like the world had tilted ever so slightly. Something had changed. The figure turned, its glowing eyes locking onto General Grant. She froze. Those eyes, filled with an unnatural intensity, seemed to pierce through her, reading her thoughts, seeing her fears. For a heartbeat, she felt an overwhelming urge to turn and flee, to run as far and as fast as she could. But she couldn't. Something held her there, rooted to the spot, helpless. "Who are you?" The figure spoke, its voice a low, hollow sound that resonated through the cavern, vibrating against the bones of the crew. It wasn't a voice that belonged to any living being. They could feel it, an ancient power that had survived for eons. It wasn't just a question. It was a command, as though the being already knew the answer, but it wanted to hear it from them. Grant hesitated. The crew held their breath. They had been sent to uncover the truth, but now that the truth was standing before them, it felt more like a nightmare. "We are humans," Grant said, her voice steady but unsure. "We came to learn. We didn't mean to intrude." The figure seemed to consider her words for a moment. It raised its hand, a long skeletal arm covered in dark robes. The air around it shimmered, a crackling force emanating from its fingers, as though the very fabric of reality was bending to its will. "You should not have come," the figure said, its voice colder now, almost imperceptible beneath the sound of the hum that filled the cavern. "You are not meant to understand. Your kind was not meant to find this place. And yet, here you are, a fragile species, thinking you can change the course of things that were set in motion long ago." General Grant stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "We have the right to know. The galaxy is changing, and we won't stand by and let forces beyond our control determine our fate." The figure's eyes glowed brighter, and for a moment, the air around them felt like it was choking them. It seemed to loom over them, a vast presence that dwarfed the crew, making them feel insignificant. "Fate," the figure's voice echoed. "You believe in fate. Your species. You are far from understanding the power of what lies beneath your feet. The galaxies, the stars, the very fabric of this universe. It is not yours to control. You are nothing but a fleeting moment in the timeline of the cosmos." Suddenly, the cavern around them began to tremble, and the walls shifted with a low, grinding noise. The glow from the symbols on the walls flared brightly, as if responding to the presence of the figure. The ground beneath their feet began to crack, revealing deep fissures, and from within the cracks came a low, resonant sound, a hum that was so deep it made the crew feel like they were drowning in it. "This is not your fight," the figure continued. "You were not meant to awaken what sleeps here. But now that you have, the consequences will be dire." General Grant's stomach dropped. She had the distinct feeling that they had unleashed something far worse than they could ever imagine. This being, whatever it was not a savior. It wasn't there to guide them. It was a force of nature, a harbinger of something far more terrible, and they had just awoken it. "We didn't know," Grant whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising hum. "We didn't know any of this." The figure tilted its head again, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Knowledge comes at a cost, human, and you have paid the price. Now you will face the consequences of your actions." As the figure spoke, the very ground beneath them seemed to shift, as though the cavern was alive, moving. The hum grew louder, shaking the air, and the walls around them. The soldiers stood frozen, too afraid to move. They had ventured into the unknown, hoping for answers, but now they were caught in something far more dangerous than they could have imagined. The figure raised its arms, and the cavern echoed with an unearthly roar. It was a sound like nothing they had ever heard, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality itself. And then, with a final, deafening crash, the world went dark. The darkness was suffocating. It was as though the entire world had collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but an endless void. The air was thick, heavy with the tension of what had just occurred. The crew of the human ship stood still, their hearts pounding in their chests, the adrenaline flooding their veins as they tried to comprehend the magnitude of the situation. "Is everyone all right?" General Grant's voice cut through the silence, though it was barely more than a whisper. The cavern that had once been so alive with strange energy was now eerily still, as if the very atmosphere had been sucked away. "General," Sergeant Lee's voice trembled, his eyes wide with fear. "What just happened? Where did that thing go?" Grant swallowed hard, her mind racing to make sense of the overwhelming events. She could feel the weight of the unknown pressing on her, threatening to crush her resolve. Whatever that figure was, whatever it represented, it was far beyond anything they had anticipated. But it wasn't just the figure that worried her. It was the sheer power that had been unleashed. She could still feel it, vibrating through the very ground beneath their feet. There was something ancient, something primal about it, and that sense of dread hadn't left them. It lingered like a storm cloud, just waiting to break. "We need to find out what it meant," Grant said, her voice shaking slightly. She wasn't sure if she was convincing herself or her crew. The truth was, she didn't know what had just happened or what was coming. All she knew was that their mission had changed in an instant. "We have to keep moving. Whatever we've awakened, we have no choice now but to face it." The team nodded in grim agreement, though the fear was evident in their eyes. Their mission was supposed to be simple: locate and investigate the ancient ruins scattered across the galaxy. What they had found was far beyond their understanding. They had come looking for answers, but had stumbled upon something that had been hidden for a reason. They continued cautiously through the cavern, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The ground beneath them seemed to hum, like it was alive, vibrating with an energy that wasn't there before. The strange symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with light, casting eerie shadows across the narrow path. The walls themselves seemed to shift, like they were no longer just solid rock, but something else entirely, something that was aware of their presence. Suddenly, there was a loud cracking noise. The floor beneath their feet gave way, and the crew stumbled, narrowly avoiding falling into the dark abyss below. The ground shifted again, violently, and General Grant found herself gripping a jagged stone ledge to keep from falling. She looked down and saw nothing but blackness below, a pit so deep it seemed to go on forever. "We need to be careful," Grant warned, pulling herself back up onto solid ground. "This place is unstable." As they pressed on, the vibrations grew stronger. The very air around them seemed to crackle with energy, and the walls started to glow with a strange, pulsing light. It was as if the cavern was alive, breathing, waiting. The feeling of being watched became overwhelming, like something unseen was tracking their every move. The crew came to a large chamber, and they hesitated at the entrance. It was different from the rest of the cavern. It felt more alive, more dangerous. The floor was covered in strange markings, and in the center of the room stood a massive stone structure, shaped like a colossal ancient door. It was covered in glowing symbols, and the air around it hummed with an energy they couldn't understand. "This is it," Grant whispered. She didn't know how she knew, but she felt it deep in her gut. "This is where we were meant to go." As they approached the door, the temperature dropped sharply. It wasn't just the chill of the air. It was as though the very essence of the room had changed, becoming colder, more hostile. General Grant could feel a presence, something ancient, something powerful, like an ancient sentinel watching over them. "Do you feel that?" Sergeant Lee asked, his voice barely audible. Grant nodded, her eyes fixed on the door. "I feel it." The door before them began to glow, the symbols shifting and rearranging as if alive, responding to their presence. The ground beneath them trembled, and the hum of energy grew louder, more intense. The air was thick with static, crackling with an unnatural force. Suddenly, a sound echoed through the chamber. It was low at first, but it grew louder, building in intensity, until it was deafening. It was like a voice, a deep guttural roar that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The force of the sound seemed to shake the very bones of the crew. General Grant stumbled back, her eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" The room began to shift again. The air became thick with an unseen force, and the hum turned into a roar, an overwhelming, all-consuming presence. It was as if the very walls were closing in on them, the air growing heavier, tenser. And then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The hum, the roar, the shifting energy, everything fell silent. For a moment, the crew stood in stunned silence, unsure of what had just happened. And then the door opened. It wasn't like a normal door. It was as if the very fabric of the universe was being torn apart. The stone structure shimmered and rippled, the surface melting away to reveal a vast, swirling vortex of light and dark. There were shapes within the vortex, flickering in and out of existence, shapes that didn't belong to any known form of life. Grant's heart pounded as the vortex expanded, growing larger and larger, until it consumed the entire room. A cold wind swept through the cavern, and the crew braced themselves, knowing that whatever lay beyond the door was more terrifying than anything they had faced before. "Move," Grant shouted, her voice breaking through the silence. "We need to leave now." But it was too late. The vortex pulled them in, and in an instant, they were swallowed by the swirling maelstrom. The moment the vortex consumed them, everything went dark. There was no light, no sound, only a suffocating, crushing silence that seemed to press in on them from all sides. General Grant's heart raced in her chest, and her breath quickened, but she couldn't move. It was as if every muscle in her body had frozen, caught in some unseen, paralyzing force. She couldn't even scream. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness lifted. The crushing weight of the unknown faded, and light slowly returned, revealing a sight that left Grant breathless. The crew found themselves standing on what seemed to be an endless plain of jagged black stone, the horizon stretching out far beyond their vision. The sky above them was a deep shade of violet, filled with swirling clouds and strange, otherworldly constellations that didn't belong to any map they had ever seen. This isn't possible," Sergeant Lee whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "Where are we?" Grant's gaze shifted around the landscape. There were no landmarks, no signs of civilization, only the stark emptiness stretching in every direction. The air felt thick, and there was an unnatural stillness that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She had never felt so small, so insignificant. It was as if they were on the edge of reality itself, in a place that existed outside of the universe they knew. "This is beyond anything we can comprehend," Grant muttered, trying to steady her nerves. "Stay alert, everyone." The crew stood in stunned silence, trying to make sense of their surroundings, but it was as if the laws of physics no longer applied. The stars overhead shimmered, but they seemed distant, like cold, indifferent eyes watching from above. There was no sun, no warmth. The atmosphere was dense, suffocating, and cold, almost oppressive. Suddenly, without warning, the ground beneath their feet trembled. It wasn't just a simple shake. It was a deep, resonating vibration, as though the very foundation of this place was shifting. The sky flickered, and for a split second, the entire landscape rippled like water disturbed by an unseen force. "What's happening?" Private Daniels asked, his voice a mix of fear and awe. "I don't know," Grant answered, but deep down, she had a terrible feeling. Whatever had brought them here, whatever force had opened that door, was now preparing to reveal itself in full force. Then it happened. A low hum filled the air, an almost imperceptible vibration that grew louder by the second. The ground began to crack, fissures appearing in the stone beneath them, as if the entire world was breaking apart. Grant instinctively took a step back, but it was too late. From the cracks in the earth, a pulse of light erupted, a brilliant, searing energy that shot up into the sky. The sky itself seemed to tremble in response, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. Then, from the center of the energy, an immense form began to emerge. At first, it was nothing more than a silhouette, a shadow against the brilliant light, but it soon took shape. The figure was massive, towering over them, casting a long, fearsome shadow across the barren land. Its form was both familiar and alien, something they could almost understand but not fully comprehend. Its features were obscured, but there was a terrifying sense of power in the way it moved, in the way it existed. It was the force they had inadvertently awakened. The figure stepped forward, and with each movement, the ground beneath them trembled. The air grew thicker, the atmosphere more oppressive. The very space around them seemed to bend and warp in response to its presence. The crew stood frozen, their breath catching in their throats. This wasn't just an ancient being or an alien force. This was something far older, something beyond their wildest fears, a force that had been slumbering for eons, waiting for the right moment to awaken. And they had just given it that moment. Grant's mind raced. How could they have been so foolish? They had thought they were only unlocking the secrets of the past, but they had opened a door to something far more dangerous. This entity, whatever it was beyond their understanding, and now it was free. The figure spoke. Its voice was like a roar, like the crash of 1,000 storms, but at the same time, it was deep and almost gentle. The words were incomprehensible at first, but they felt like a command, a force that reached into their very souls. The crew flinched, but Grant stood her ground. She had to. There was no turning back now. "Who are you?" Grant finally managed to ask, her voice shaking but determined. The figure's eyes, if they could be called eyes, turned toward her, glowing with an eerie light. The force of its gaze was overwhelming, like it was looking through her very being, peeling back layers of her mind and soul. "I am what you awakened," it said, its voice echoing in the minds of everyone around. "You called, and I came. You sought knowledge, and I answered. Now you must pay the price for disturbing what was meant to remain dormant." The words sent a chill through Grant's spine. This was no mere force of nature. This was something ancient, something powerful beyond measure. It wasn't just answering their call. It was now in control. The ground began to crack again, deeper this time, as the entity's power surged. The crew backed away, but it was futile. They were trapped. "You have broken the seal," the figure intoned, its voice a low, resonant hum. "And for that, you will suffer the consequences." Grant could feel the weight of its power pressing down on them. There was no escape, no way out. Whatever this being was, it was here now. And it was angry. With a final, deafening roar, the sky above them tore open. The entity's power surged forward, enveloping them in a whirlwind of pure energy. The last thing Grant heard was her own voice, screaming for mercy, though she knew, deep down, that it was too late.